Saddle up, everybody. As promised, Maddie, we have the AFC Preview Show with you guys right here on the Manely Bronco Podcast. And for you listeners out there, thank you guys for tuning in to the Manely Bronco Podcast over on Spotify, over on iTunes, as well as YouTube, and of course, other platforms such as Google Podcast, and really anywhere else that you guys feel like you want to catch the Manely Bronco Podcast. Thank you guys so much for making the Manely Bronco Podcast part of your daily commute. So, Maddie, how are you doing today, man?
I'm pretty good. Just watching some college football. I didn't think it was going to get here. It's been a lot of fun, like kind of falling back into the old routines. Even college game day, watching it, on Saturday morning. I've really missed that being a part of my life. So, kind of cool that they're able to still do that. Lee Corso is obviously isolated by himself as he's a high-risk individual. But, man, it's just great having ball back in my life. It's been entirely too long. So, yeah, and I'm really excited to do take 2 of the AFC preview. We had those technical difficulties. We would have had it out before the Thursday night game, but that's fine. We still have it coming to you right now. And honestly, nobody really thought that the Texans were going to win, right? So, like, legitimately outside of the state of Texas.
I mean, I will say they probably thought it would be a much closer game, but at least for some people, they thought it would be a lot closer game. But no, I mean, I don't think that really anyone on the surface probably thought that the Texans were going to at least go in there and beat the Kansas City Chiefs. One thing we probably should mention is we are going to make a special edition podcast for you guys to where we'll do an AFC preview, and then immediately following that, we will do a special edition podcast for you where we preview the Denver Broncos. And so we talk about the Denver Broncos season. We make it, pun intended, we make it Manely Broncos, should we say, Maddie. And you guys can catch the Manely Bronco Podcast on Twitter as well, at Manely Broncos, for all of our content. Maddie, one of the things, too, that we probably should mention, we did do the NFC preview.
Yeah, we did do that. It was a lot of fun, and I think we covered a lot of ground there. Obviously, all of my picks are correct, so if you're a betting person, go ahead and get that easy money now.
It is the Manely Broncos podcast, of course, and so thank you guys again for tuning in. And yeah, so I am really looking forward to this season. As Maddie and I have outlined so many times, of course, because we need something. We need something positive right now, should we say, or at least to have football back. And for my sake, I guess the Nuggets did come out on top in a gut-wrenching game 5. So we'll see. We'll see if they can come out and win Game 6 again and force another Game 7, which apparently the Nuggets are a much better team down 3-1.
Yeah, I mean, they should just pretend they're down 3-1 at the start of every single series. So
you would totally think, right? I mean,
it's crazy how different. Well, Harris has been a good addition, getting him back, and I know it's a football podcast, and I really don't care about the Nuggets a lot, but I watch all the games. That Jokic, man, he's so good at basketball. Jamal Murray needs to be able to. He played a little bit better in Game 5, but he was forcing the issue a ton in Game 4. So just letting the game come more to him. And Porter Jr., he sucked all game until it mattered, and then scored the 7 points at the end there to help give them the win. So there you go. So there are still 3 sports alive for Colorado right now, as far as the main sports go. Unfortunately, our Avs didn't make it this far, but yeah, we'll see. Obviously, we think the Rockies are going to let us down just because they just don't have enough arms and their bats go to sleep.
But as far as to kind of keep the Colorado theme going, they did have a walk-off grand slam with Charlie Blackmon we're recording this obviously on Saturday. They did the walk-off grand slam last night on Friday, and it made me it kind of reminded me a lot of the Ryan Spielborg's grand slam, where Spielborg's just ran around the bases, and it wasn't exactly to that extent, but just anytime I see a walk-off grand slam, I just immediately gravitate to when Spilly hit the walk-off grand slam against the Giants. It was just one of those great times. Anyway, so this is not a baseball podcast or a football a basketball podcast. This is a football podcast. So Maddie, we probably should get to the main stories of the day, which is of course that the Broncos did reach out to players. They did reach out to a few players. That would be Cameron Wake, Clay Matthews. They did reach out to them. They were unfortunate as far as coming to terms to a deal. That said, it is worth noting that a guaranteed deal happens before week 1, and so if they can go past week 2, then the opportunity potentially for a guaranteed deal seems less likely. And so I think that, and so I think for the Broncos, while on the surface it seems kind of bizarre that they did not sign someone, I would still very much envision the Denver Broncos as far as bringing someone in. Now, they did in fact bring a player in. They brought in Isaiah Irving, who has ties to the Broncos with Vic Fangio, and they brought him into the practice squad. And another news and notes, Maddie, there was the talk this morning as far as Cortland Sutton and the AC joint injury that he had, which was obviously a tough blow. They did catch a quick break, but there's a 50-50 chance that he will play on Monday night. One of the things, and the talk, of course, is that he'll probably end up receiving a cortisone shot, probably see how he feels, and then goes to play on Monday night. Another is, of course, Hamler. Seems like more doubtful than questionable. He's listed as questionable, but Fangio said he's more doubtful than questionable. And of course, to tie back into Cameron Wake and Clay Matthews, the possibility of Derek Tuszka. If you're Graham Tidkey, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a huge fan of Graham and you're a huge fan of Derek Tuszka, you're probably smiling ear to ear with this news, right, Maddie? That that Derek Tuszka, there's a possibility that he could be promoted from the practice squad. So anyway, lot to unpack there, Maddie. But yeah,
and us signing Brandon McManus to a 4-year extension, like $17 million total for that deal. So it's a little rich for a kicker. In the Slack, I asked if he could rush the passer. No one actually got back to me on that, but we definitely do need another pass rusher in the worst way, and it looks like Elway is at least putting feelers out there. It sounded a little harsh coming saying that Clay Matthews was like, no, I'm done. Basically, I'm not playing for anyone, and then they had to retract that statement.
He alone retracted
on Thursday, saying no, that wasn't the fit for me. Basically made it sound like Denver wasn't a good enough situation for him. It turns out that potentially it was the money. But what's interesting is we found out that it was a deal for $5 million. That was the offer. The issue was that it just wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't going to be guaranteed. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't possibly get something done with a Matthews or a Wake after this week is done and potentially get something that's not a guaranteed deal, because that's one less week that they would be on the roster. So it's very interesting, and that tells me two things. One, that says that potentially, I know we've seen the 4 to 6 month time frame for a return for Von Miller. At least that's what's been pushed lately. Well, if it's closer to the 6th month, then that's the season, right? If the Broncos legitimately think it could be around that 4-month mark, then who knows? That makes things a little more interesting. The Broncos not being willing to go out and give a guaranteed deal to someone, though, means that either A, they want an out, or B, they think that maybe that player is just a Band-Aid for a little bit until Vaughn can come back. So I don't really know what our overall thought is. I know that you want to create as many outs as you possibly can in a front office, especially if a guy comes in not having gone through conditioning, not having gone through camp, not having been with the team. If it just doesn't work out, you want to be able to just move on from that and not have any dead money associated to that deal. But the Broncos kind of don't have a ton of leverage, it seems, and yet they're trying to manufacture some anyway, and the players just aren't biting. So Wake didn't sign either. I don't know if he got the $5 million offer. That would be a little rich for him, given his age. But it's very interesting with those. And then to bring it full circle back to Tuska, I mean, we drafted the guy for a reason, or brought him in for a reason, and the guy has a lot of talent. And the only issue is the competition that he faced, which is why he wasn't seen as a more prolific prospect rushing from the edge. So, but like we've talked about before, rushing the passer is rushing the passer. And if you've got the skills and you got the speed and you can get the dip down, like it, a lot of times that competition doesn't necessarily matter. So, he's somebody who could come in and maybe make a name for himself right away. And especially, and we'll talk about that in the preview, with the Titans' offensive line issues potentially that they're going to have, could be very interesting there.
Wow. We just got some news today that Vic Beasley, Jameel Douglas, Darrington Evans, and this one, I mean, not to say that this one would potentially be big, all those players not being in the game for Monday night, but this one is huge. Dory Jackson will not play for the Tennessee Titans.
Wow. So that's a lot of their chops on defense for sure. Their fastest defensive back, their best pass rusher, right? And their change of pace back in Darrington Evans is huge. And that goes with the Isaiah Wilson news. He was already on the COVID list for the second time. But then he had a DUI. So they're looking into that. So he's probably not going to go, their first round pick out of Georgia. So that a lot of talent that the Titans aren't going to be able to roll out there in Denver on Monday night. Excuse me. Very, very interesting. Dory Jackson, he's also a special teams guy and can contribute on that side as well. So, wow. If KJ Hamler can, in fact, go, there's absolutely nobody.
He can't go, probably.
Officially.
Yeah.
Probably. Well, I mean, they still got to find some way to check Jerry Jeudy. Maybe Jeudy can get loose for a couple of deep passes. There's nobody else in that secondary that'd be able to keep up with Jeudy or Hamler. So very, very interesting there.
Yeah, and obviously we'll talk about that during the Broncos preview show. But, Maddie, let's get into it. Let's get into the AFC Preview Show over on the Manely Broncos Podcast. Manely Broncos Podcast. Thank you guys very much again for tuning in over here on Spotify, Google Podcast, iTunes. And, if you guys are listening to the Manely Bronco Podcast on iTunes, please subscribe to the Manely Broncos Podcast and give us a review. Let us know what you think of the podcast. And, of course, anything that we need to work on. We want to make sure that we are producing the best content for you as far as the Broncos Podcast is concerned. So, and also for Matty, before we get started to the AFC Preview Show, follow him over on Twitter at Matty Molespod, myself at Cameron Parker PO. Let's get into this, Matty. It is the AFC Preview Show. Obviously, we're looking into it from the possibility that, we probably are fresh and really kind of collected in our thoughts, because we feel pretty comfortable about where we're headed as far as the positions and everything else. And as we mentioned, Maddie, it's probably worth clarifying again, the playoff teams is 7 this year, not what it once was. So there are 7 playoff teams this year, and it's worth noting that there aren't really any significant changes between Maddie and my picks, except for one team in one division. That's where we have the potential change. So Maddie, let's get into this. Let's get into the big one. Let's get into the AFC North with the Ravens, Steelers, the Browns, and the Bengals. Let's get into that one.
Okay, yeah. So you and I both agree the Ravens are going to be the representatives or the division winner in this division. That's pretty easy to state. We both think that the Browns are going to miss the playoffs. That's not to say that they're not going to be a little more good this year. That's not to say that Baker Mayfield's not the answer, or that they don't have a lot of talent on that team. They in fact do, although their defense right now is just decimated with injuries. Week 1, easy money is going to be on the Ravens to win big. Where we differ is that I think that the Steelers are going to be a wild card team, and you think that it's going to be the Cincinnati Bengals with Smokey Joe Burrow himself just doing big things. So basically I think more people would agree with my pick. The Steelers were a really tough team last year, even though they had a lot of injuries. Their defense is stout. Minka is the real deal. They're getting Big Ben back. Connor's healthy. Juju's healthy. Deontay Johnson is there. They just brought in Eric Ebron. There's a lot to like on that Pittsburgh team. To go with their incredible offensive line, one of the best offensive lines in football, they're going to be able to win ugly. They can win in shootouts if they need, as long as Big Ben stays healthy. Their defense and special teams are going to be able to put up points themselves. Like, this team is tough. This is definitely a playoff team in my estimation. Now, defend yourself. Why are you picking the Bengals to go first pick to being in the wild card this season?
No, I'm not actually predicting that the Bengals will be the first pick of the wild card. What I will just
No. I'm saying from the first pick of the draft to now they're in the wild card. That's a big jump.
Yeah, I am in fact picking the Cincinnati Bengals to make the playoffs this year, and I think for my evaluation as far as the Steelers and then the Bengals, those are the two teams. I mean, I think if you're looking at it strictly from this particular division, two teams will be coming out of this division and going to the playoffs. It will either be the Steelers or it will either be the Bengals. And some could say it is the Steelers. The defensive side of the ball is loaded with talent. I mean, they added Minka Fitzpatrick in the offseason, or during the regular season last year. They added, they have T.J. Watt, who's an absolute baller and is, at least by health standards, way better than his brother at this current stage in their careers. And, I mean, my only thing is just where are they at with Big Ben? Big Ben has dealt with some really bad luck the last few seasons with injuries and everything else, and we certainly do not know where they are at or where he is at right now. I mean, we're not there every day. We're not even there at all right now to potentially even say where he's at. But, I mean, it will be a dogfight between the Bengals and the Steelers. The one thing I think will be really interesting is where is the chemistry going to end up being with Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow right out of the gate. I think that will be one of the interesting things that could really help them go into the playoffs. Where are they at? Because offensively, they have probably some of the most underrated and not talked about weapons on the offensive side of the ball, with guys like Tyler Boyd and Auden Tate and, of course, A.J. Green. The question, of course, is the health of A.J. Green. And, then you have the running back Joe Mixon to add to the mix with their running game. So offensively, they shouldn't have any issues moving the ball down the field. The question is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Geno Atkins is still there on the defensive side. Carlos Dunlap, I believe, is still there, if I'm not mistaken. The real question mark is just going to end up being that secondary and the linebacking core. That's going to be the true test of where that defense is at for the Cincinnati Bengals, and can they create enough pressure to help out that secondary for the Cincinnati Bengals? That's going to be a true test. And all in all, though, it will end up being between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And in some ways, a lot like when we come to the AFC East, it is such a weird year. It is a very weird year because the Patriots have fallen to the point where they may not even win the division, but this is the first time that said division is really wide open. And so if the Cincinnati Bengals are in a position to clinch the playoffs, the Bengals really, as such a young team and with Zach Taylor at the helm, they have not had that opportunity before. Some players have had that opportunity, of course, of going to the playoffs. But Zach Taylor himself and as a head coach, this would end up being his first time of being that close to the playoffs. And when a young team is that close to the playoffs, sometimes pressure gets to you. Sometimes the pressure gets to you, and we'll certainly see what happens with that. Maybe they kind of unfortunately cook under the pressure. Who knows? But I think that's going to end up being the true test. And then at that particular point, that's where you'll need a guy like a Big Ben, a guy that has won Super Bowls, and a guy that has really come up clutch in big games. That's where you're going to need a Big Ben. And so maybe that does give the nod to the Steelers. But I think for the Bengals, they have enough offense on the offensive side of the ball to really win some games this year.
I mean, yeah, it'll be fun. Obviously, there's going to be lumps for Joe Burrow. I mean, there's lumps for every single rookie quarterback. It doesn't really matter who that rookie quarterback is. Trevor Lawrence will be the same way next year, especially with this, this COVID season and the lack of all the reps that you normally would have gotten and being able to just build that chemistry with guys. So very interesting for that. I do think that you're going to be hard pressed to see them for like 13 points in a game this year, regardless of who that defense is that they're facing. It's just you got to play both sides of the football, and I just they're going to lose lots of games. They're going to lose lots of games that are like scored in the mid to high 20s, low 30s because that defense is just so bad. But,
no, yeah,
I mean,
and on the Browns side of things, Matty, that's one team where if all the Pistons are firing for the Cleveland Browns, they could compete. They could compete. It just all depends on where Baker Mayfield is at and where the relationship is with Kevin Stefanski. I think Stefanski is the one area where he really could help Baker Mayfield a lot and really kind of help extend his game even more to where we saw how good Mayfield was in his first year as potentially being that franchise quarterback. This is a huge year for Baker as far as to really kind of shut people up and really tell people, where he's at mentally, where he's at physically, and that he's still got it, that he's still a really, really good quarterback in this league. He belongs in this league, and that he is still the future of the Cleveland Browns. So this is still a huge year for him and for the Browns franchise. But I can foresee it to where the Bengals are ahead of the Browns in this division And so I would not be surprised about that. We touched as far as the teaser on the AFC on the AFC East, Matty. Let's talk about that one. We talked about the Patriots, right? There's a reference to the to potentially cooking under the pressure and really with this. Where are you leaning? I'm going to go with the Bills, particularly in this division, and have them winning this division. I think that with Josh Allen there, with adding Stephon Diggs, a true number one, you could even argue that he was a number one with the Minnesota Vikings, although it could really fluctuate between he and Adam Thielen at Minnesota. But Stephon Diggs really gives a reliable, true route running guy and a gifted wide receiver at that too. That's not just a route runner. For Josh Allen, you have Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. You have Dawson Knox at tight end for the Buffalo Bills. Their defense with Tremaine Edwards, Ed Oliver, the Tre'Davious White. I mean, they are, that defense is very underrated. I would even say that between Tremaine Edmonds and Alexander Johnson, those are probably the two most underrated linebackers and underrated best linebackers in the National Football League. No one is talking about Tremaine Edmonds, and no one is talking about Alexander Johnson. So I think that for the Bills, they are right there to win this division, and I think they do win this division. The question is just, where are the Patriots at? And do the Dolphins surprise?
The Dolphins surprise. I think that they're going to be better, but they weren't even as good as their poor record showed last year. They just won a couple of games down the stretch to make them look a little better. One including over the New England Patriots in Week 17. I think that we're probably going to end up seeing Tua sooner rather than later. Probably after the first month of the season's done, Tua's going to come in. Obviously, the Jets are a dumpster fire. Their offense sucks. Their defense, nobody wants to play there. Jamal Adams is gone. C.J. Mosley opted out for the season. The Jets are going to be bad. So that brings us down to the Patriots and the Bills for me. Cam Newton, I think he's going to be a good fit for the Patriots. Patriots had a ton of talent to include Patrick Chung on that in the defensive secondary, as well as Hightower. They're not playing this year. They opted out as well, and it's just a big transition post Brady for them. I know Bill Belichick's going to have his guys ready. He's gonna have sound schemes and a good plan every week, which will give them a chance. But I just think that they're so devoid of actual talent now. And honestly, Buffalo, the way that they win, they're used to winning games like 17-14, 10-13, like those type of really ugly games. And if you're going to play a game in the mud against the Bills, like they're going to beat you with the experience there. And Josh Allen is a problem with his legs. Unfortunately, he's also a problem with his arm. Not super accurate. So you mentioned them getting Diggs. He's a great receiver, great route runner. It doesn't really matter if you overthrow him 10 yards, right? And that's saying something if you can overthrow Stephon Diggs 10 yards. But he managed to do it with Smokey too. So John Brown got overthrew a lot last year, which really pissed me off because like I had him in DraftKings and those big plays that could have happened. I say all that, it's going to be an ugly division. It's arguably, it's up there with the NFC East, in my opinion, for most boring division in football. And I think it's going to be the Bills, and there's going to be no one else in that division that makes it the playoffs.
Even then, it's been kind of boring. I mean, the Patriots winning the division every single year when Tom Brady was there, it's been kind of boring, really, from that even perspective too. And as we referenced before with the Bengals making the playoffs on my reference, this will be the second time that the Bills are actually on the surface true divisional winners in a long time. and they did make the playoffs. That is going to help them going into this year. The fact they went into the playoffs, they didn't play great, or it was a really good playoffs, I should say, with the Houston Texans. But the last handful of minutes, it was really not good for Josh Allen and the Bills. So can they really make sure that's in the back, that's erased from their memory, that they don't even have to think about it? I think that will be key. If they can just understand the fact that the at least for the Bills' sake, can they just glean on just that playoff experience and use that come crunch time when they are winning a division? I think that's going to be the true test, because if they don't, and Cam Newton does quite well with the Patriots are going to be one of those teams that's going to be either vying for a wild card or division. It would not shock me to see with the Bills and with Cam Newton that potentially the Patriots win this division again. And I know that it's going to sound potentially again boring, but it would be really something if Cam Newton comes into Bill Belichick's system and really wins the division in his first year. That would be something. And so we'll certainly see what happens. And obviously with the Jets case, I feel so bad for Sam Darnold. I feel terribly bad for Sam Darnold. He is such a talented quarterback. And to not have weapons, let alone Quincy Enunwa, I believe, was one of their best wide receivers, and he retired. Or he stepped away. They released Quincy Enunwa. And then now they go out and they draft Denzel Mims and Mekhi Becton. So they certainly helped him out in that regard. They certainly helped Sam Darnold out with that. They signed a whole bunch of offensive linemen, former Denver Bronco Connor McGovern, but and a bunch of other interior and a tackle as well, and of course drafting Mekhi Becton. But the Jets, obviously we can just say they lucked out with Denzel Mims in the draft with how they got him so late. But the Jets are in such a weird position that their entire offense is really Le'Veon Bell. I mean, Sam Darnold is a phenomenal quarterback, still in my estimation, but he needs serious help outside of Le'Veon Bell. He needs serious help. That's not just Chris Herndon. They need help in like the worst way possible. It's just really sad for me to see a guy like that, like Sam Darnold, just really, just unfortunately, just not have enough tools around and make it work. Moving on to the AFC South, Maddie.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it gets interesting. Yeah,
for sure. So we saw one team on Thursday night out of this division, the Houston Texans. We saw them play. And I think, honestly, what we saw Thursday night is going to be what we end up kind of seeing all season. Hopefully a little bit better execution on offense for the Texans. I was really kind of tilted because I had a lot of Randall Cobb, and it took him 57 minutes to even get a catch in this game. They're going to have to get him more involved in the middle of the field and just take some of the pressure off of Deshaun Watson, because that offensive line is bad. Their defense is bad. They can run the ball a little bit. David Johnson looked fine. Duke Johnson is hurt, so I don't know how long he's going to be out. Will Fuller looked great. He had like 51% of the air yards and the targets and all the things for them. So big role for him stepping into the nuke role. Brandon Cooks wasn't a big deal, wasn't all that, but I see a lot I like on the offense. I see a lot I dislike on the defense. I don't really see them being a contender for even a wild card spot. They're out. Obviously, Jacksonville sucks. That's the end of my analysis for them. Enjoy Trevor Lawrence next season. That leaves us with two teams, the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts. I like the Colts to win this division. Phillip Rivers, he's been there before. I think he's going to give that offense a little extra pop. Maybe he's not as mobile as Jacoby Brissett is, but I think his arm talent maybe is a little better even now. They have a lot of weapons, a lot of guys that can catch and run. Paris Campbell is a guy that you're going to want to remember his name because he's going to be kind of, I think he might end up being everything that people thought Curtis Samuel was going to be. Both of them are Ohio State products, but that's very interesting. Some people are excited about Pittman. He's got a lot of upside, but really the two-headed monster in the backfield and that offensive line is going to be what makes this thing tick. A defense that's going to keep them in a lot of games anyway is going to allow for positive game scripts for both of these guys, Marlon Mack and then the rookie Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. They're just going to be able to run the ball potentially 30 times a game, and they're not going to have Phillip Rivers throw it 40 times a game, and that's a pretty good formula behind that offensive line where these guys can average 4.5 yards a carry or more, depending on the competition. So both of these guys are great. People like Nyheim Hines as a potential, change of pace guy. Yeah, for type of PPR, type of if they're in a negative game script type of thing. But I honestly think it's just going to be the two-headed monster between Mack and Taylor, and they're not really going to be trailing a ton this season. This to me looks like it's an 11 or 12 win team, honestly, as long as Phillip Rivers can stay upright and he doesn't have to do everything, which he kind of had to do a lot in Los Angeles there. So very, very interesting. And for Phillip Rivers, he's used to not playing in front of fans anyway. So if there's not fans for a while, it's not going to be a big deal for him. The defense is solid. Leonard is amongst the best in the league already. And then they just got DeForest Buckner in that huge blockbuster trade with the San Francisco 49ers. I think that defensive line is going to be stout. They really don't have a lot of weaknesses on the team in general. And they're not quite on the Ravens-Chiefs stratosphere in my mind, but they're going to definitely be in the hunt the last couple of weeks of the season for the number 1 seed in the AFC. And then that brings us to the Titans for me. I think last year they kind of caught lightning in a bottle. Derrick Henry had his most productive season by far. Ryan Tannehill had his most productive season by far. Both were compensated adequately for that. There are a lot of issues. We talked about that for the Titans to start the season. And then, yes, A.J. Brown is a stud. He's a freaking monster. I think Jonnu Smith could be a really effective player for them moving forward. But it's pretty easy. I mean, this is a team that the Broncos shut out last year. And I think the formula is kind of out there. You just stack the box, you make Tannehill beat you. And outside of A.J. Brown, there's really nobody else to have to worry about. Corey Davis never lived up to his number 5 overall draft pick hype. Unfortunately, I thought he was going to be another Terrell Owens type player, and it just didn't work out. But A.J. Brown is everything that they thought that Corey Davis was going to be. So they're going to be competitive. I think they're going to be a playoff team, but I just don't think that they're going to have enough to win that division.
I think on the defensive side is where Tennessee can win this division, between Tennessee and Indianapolis. And that's to where it's a flip. That is to where it's a coin flip between the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts based on defense. However, defensively, I'm taking the Titans over the Colts defensively without questions. And then now, of course, you add Jadeveon Clowney to the mix. You add, of course, the secondary of guys like Jonathan Joseph and Dory Jackson and Malcolm Butler, and their front seven with Vic Beasley. Obviously, Vic Beasley, Dory Jackson, those guys are out, but at least with Monday night. But on the surface, those are types of things that you just hope don't linger to future games. And because of with a COVID type season, you want to make sure that the chemistry is right there with you just every step of the way, so that you can string games together. And especially in division, you want to make sure that you can string games together. And so with Tennessee, I think that the fact that they were able to really pay a lot of money to guys like Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill, for what really was the first time in a long time, really showed up and really proved that he's a capable quarterback in this league. Tannehill, it was never really about how talented he was. I mean, people forget the guy is a pretty exceptional athlete. The guy was a wide receiver at Texas A&M. Like, people forget how good of an athlete he was. And so it was really more just how consistent can he be as a thrower, how consistent of a quarterback can he be to really take that next step. That was really the real issue with Ryan Tannehill. And so ultimately, if you're looking at it from the Titans and the Colts perspective, those are the two dogs really of that division. The one area where, and if you're going into this with Phillip Rivers, you're going into a much better situation than you did with the Chargers. You have a true running game like you once had with a very healthy Melvin Gordon, who's now with us. He's now with the Denver Broncos now. And I honestly believe that Jonathan Taylor very well might end up being their 3-down running back at some particular point in this season. He is too talented a running back that, frankly, you can make an argument that between Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor, those were those two boundary guys that should have been first-round caliber running backs that you could draft. Obviously, first-round drafting, as far as first-round running backs, that's been a huge no-no over the years because you can get a really good player, a guy like a Zach Moss later, or a bunch of the guys that have really come even before him, maybe even a Cam Akers too in this last draft for the Los Angeles Rams. But I mean, overall, those were the two best talented backs out of this class, was Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor. Side note on Michael Pittman Jr. That has to do with the Broncos. One of the real reasons is just my intuition and just what I can probably tell. I think one of the reasons why the Broncos locked up or their eyes on Michael Ojemudia was he really did a fantastic job on Michael Pittman Jr. in college when he was at USC, when Iowa played USC. So that's kind of like a sidebar. And for the Texans, I think they will be vying for a playoff spot. I think that because they're just too good with Deshaun Watson just leading the helm himself, that they will be vying for a playoff spot. So they'll be one of those boundary teams that maybe we see 3 teams from the AFC West, as weird and kind of chaotic as that division is. Maybe we see 3 teams out of there just because of how good Watson is. But at the end of the day, you just don't know where they're at with weapons, where they're at with defense. I mean, are they just trying to patch things together for just what has been such a weird year that they? I just hope that they don't turn Deshaun Watson into a Sam Darnold situation, to where who once had DeAndre Hopkins to now having nothing. I just hope that he does not end up turning into a Sam Darnold situation with the Jets. I just hope that doesn't happen because Watson is just too talented a quarterback to not at least have something to work with.
I mean, let's not get it twisted though. Like Crowder and Herndon, and now what Lev Bell is like a far cry from what Kenny Stills and Randall Cobb and Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks and David Johnson and Duke Johnson. Like, there's still a lot of guys that he could hit. It's not like Watson has nobody.
Well,
he just doesn't have that one somebody that Nuke was.
And it's not
maybe it's going to be more distribution of wealth. And the big thing is, can those guys stay healthy? Cooks hasn't been able to really stay completely healthy. Fuller most certainly hasn't. since he was drafted out of Notre Dame. So those guys have a lot of talent. It's just like, can they stay on the field?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and you're right. I mean, it's just, I just hope that, and because at least for the Jets' sake, they needed, or they still need a true number one. And maybe that's where I'm kind of drawing the line with the Jets and the Texans, that I just hope that both Darnold and Watson at some particular point in their career get a true number one wide receiver. And maybe that'll come in this next draft, because the wide receiving class is pretty darn loaded in the 2021 draft class, both this year of the class of TD, CD, and Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and Michael Pittman Jr., T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Reagor. Just the list goes on for how good that draft class was at wide receiver. And this class could be even better in 2021. Moving on now to the one and only division, Maddie, and we should probably recap. So right now, based on the divisions, Maddie and I have the Bills winning the AFC East. And I think the Dolphins do make a little bit of a push. I think they will probably win games they probably should lose. And I think that's just an indication of how much better they are. But they do not go to the playoffs. Patriots will vie for the playoffs, but they won't make it. But the Bills win that division. The AFC North is where we have our surprise. Not for who wins the division. Maddie and I are pretty consistent there. The Ravens will win the division, and for both Maddie and I's pick. But I say the Cincinnati Bengals will surprise and win the division this year in 2020. Or sorry, not the division. They will make it to the wild card. That will be the Cincinnati Bengals. The Steelers will be, for Maddie, will be one of the other three teams that make it into the wild card. And the AFC South, I, interestingly enough, have the Tennessee Titans winning that division of where they're at right now. I think that Tennessee is just too good of a football team all around right now than the Indianapolis Colts. Although, based on the offensive line and just a true test of that offensive line, and even with Ryan Tannehill, the true test is going to be how good is the Titans going to end up being without Jack Conklin in the mix. That's going to end up being one of the largest looming issues of the football team, and especially with the looming, of course, off the field stuff now with Isaiah Wilson now into the mix. We'll certainly see what happens with that. But I have the Titans winning the division. I do have the Colts making the playoffs as a wild card spot. And I do believe that the Texans will be at least competitive with both the Colts, Titans, and Texans. The Texans will be competitive with the Titans and Colts, but they will fall just short of the playoffs. Moving now to our division, Maddie. I don't think there's any debate with this one. I think the true discussion is just going to be, if you go up and down this division, Maddie, it seems like, yes, the Kansas City Chiefs, because we probably won't spend much of the time there discussing that they won the division. Because, like the Ravens, you could argue that they're probably the top dog in the entire AFC, or let alone the entire NFL. Really, they're the reigning NFL Super Bowl champs. But up and down the division, you could really go through each and every team, the Broncos, Raiders, and Chargers, and say that all those teams are better.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Chiefs didn't get any worse this offseason. And then they added Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So, like, they're obviously elite. We don't need to spend any more time on them. Patrick Mahomes is good at football. Awful taste in food because he likes to put ketchup on steak. So since that's all I have to make fun of him for, and maybe sounding like Kermit the Frog, that's about it. You could change my voice and make me ketchup on steak for the rest of my life and give me a $600 or a $500 million contract. I'll do that any day of the week. The Raiders, they're moving to Vegas. Like, they're just drafting a lot of really good football players, even if they're kind of overdrafting them a little bit. Arnett surprised me, but after digging into it, a lot of people actually really liked him. So maybe he's going to be really good for them. Clelin Ferrell was a solid pick for them last year, even though he was picked, number 4 overall. So it was a really high pick for him. Maybe they overdrafted him there too. But they're getting guys in there that are really good football players, and it's making their team better. I don't think Derek Carr is going to be the answer long term. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think Mariota is their starting quarterback week 1 next season. It's a bit of a hot take, but I'm sticking to my guns there because I really have no reason not to. The Williams out early to start the season, but they got Ruggs. Brian Edwards is an absolute baller. You're going to have to know his name soon if you don't already, out of the University of South Carolina, the real USC, as my wife and all of our family likes to call them. Really interesting, though, the pick immediately before Brian Edwards, Lynn Bowden. They've already traded him to the Dolphins, so maybe they didn't see what they needed to in that. I've never seen a player get drafted in the NFL like that, and then traded immediately before ever taking a real snap with them.
That high, too. That high, let alone that high.
Yeah, I mean, now granted, like John Elway's situation or like the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, like those are different types of situations. But this guy was, all intents and purposes drafted to go play there, and then they traded him. So maybe like their eye for talent isn't exactly as good as they thought, but Ruggs is a beast. Jacobs is a beast. Waller's a beast. There's a lot to like on that offense. Some good players on that defense. It's not the pushover Raiders defense of the past completely, even though I think that game shoots out week 1. The Raiders are better. I don't know how much better. I think they're probably like a 5 or 6 win team, which is still a really competitive team. The Chargers, they're the first year in SoFi Stadium. I'm not a believer in Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, they aren't either because they drafted Justin Herbert early. I am not sold on Herbert, but a lot of people are. That's just a whole team that can't stay healthy. I know that's pot calling the kettle black, being the Broncos fan right now, saying, "Oh, you can't stay healthy." But
look at the Chargers history.
These guys are always hurt, and Ekeler is going to have to step up and be that guy for the entire season. I don't believe in Kelly or Jackson to be able to really carry that load for them. Hunter Henry, hopefully he stays healthy for them. But Mike Williams is already hurt, right? He's already banged up. He's probably out week 1. And Keenan Allen's a year older. They lost Derwin James in the secondary. That's a huge loss for them. They can still get after the passer a little bit. They still have a couple of good corners in Harris and Hayward. They got talent still on defense, but they drafted Kenneth Murray to man the middle. A lot of talent on defense, but they're gonna have to absolutely have to win games like 17-14, maybe 21-17. But you're not really going to see this offense bust out. I don't think they scored 30 points all year. Puts a lot of pressure on the defense, and so I don't think the Chargers get there. Now I'm a homer, so I think the Broncos got a shot. We got Drew Lock still. We've got Jerry Jeudy. We've done a lot to surround Locke with talent. I think that even without Von Miller, we still have a lot of talent on that defense. And we've got Vic Fangio to help scheme us in the right place and really kind of help cover our deficiencies. Really, variance was on the wrong side for us the first month of the season with no sacks, no turnovers, and a couple of plays like that Bears game, for instance. Just several games could have gone the other way. I mean, the Broncos win one more game. I think we're a playoff team, right? So, we're right there in the thick of it. I think the Broncos got a lot better this year. Even losing Von Miller, I still think overall our football team's better and more complete than it was last year. So I have the Broncos representing us in the playoffs as a wild card team in the AFC West, but I don't think the other teams quite have enough talent to get there as currently constructed.
I think you could make the argument, had Derwin James not sustained the injury, you probably could make the argument that it was between the Broncos and Chargers. And just objectively, if someone picked the Chargers to make the playoffs, had Derwin James been healthy, I probably wouldn't argue with that, because they are a much better football team when he's on there. Defensively, certainly is still better even without Derwin James. They now add Chris Harris Jr. He did take a little bit of a step back, if I'm being honest. The last few seasons, he has taken a little bit of a step back. Father Time's always going to do that, and especially for corners and everything else. We saw it with Champ Bailey. It was just unfortunate, but I think for Chris Harris, he still will give them some consistency. And for the Chargers, you look at it also with their secondary. You have Casey Hayward, who is well regarded as probably one of the more underrated and underappreciated cornerbacks in the National Football League, alongside really Chris Harris Jr. I mean,
health issues,
but that's really the one area where, if you look at it from the Chargers' perspective, and that entire team really has been injuries. Mike Williams is banged up. And of course, Melvin Gordon. What will the true test of that running game be without potentially, on paper, a 3-down running back? I mean, that's going to be the true test. You're going to be relying on Austin Eckler to be a 3-down running back. Early on in the season, he did pretty well, but on the surface, Melvin Gordon, early on in his career, did so much to really lighten the load for Phillip Rivers that the Chargers need someone to help take the pressure off Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert, at that matter, at some point, if Herbert sees action in 2020. I do believe they believe in Tyrod, because had they believed that Tyrod Taylor was not the guy, at least initially, they would have gone out and signed Cam Newton. There was a lot of speculation that the Chargers were going to be one of the final teams to sign Cam Newton, and in fact, they decided not to sign him. And maybe that was just because they believed that they were either going to draft Tua Tagovailoa or Justin Herbert. Maybe that was what they were just all thinking all along. But clearly, they did do the smart thing, that Justin Herbert, despite the fact that he is just a talented quarterback, he still is a project in some ways, but he's a very talented project to draft as high as he was. So getting Tyrod Taylor and getting a player with technically the same skill set, maybe not as the same mobility to an extent. Justin Herbert can move around, but not to the extent of a Tyrod Taylor. I do believe that Tyrod Taylor at least has shown that he at least belongs in the NFL as a quarterback that can win you some football games. And Anthony Lynn has a lot of history with Tyrod back from the days with Buffalo. So maybe there's still some connection there. And really, that's as far as the Chargers are going to go with this team. If Tyrod really takes a huge leap up as far as the quarterback goes, then the Chargers will be a very competitive football team to vie for a playoff position. And as far as the Raiders, the Henry Ruggs fit still kind of baffles me a little bit. Ruggs was arguably the best wide receiver in this draft, alongside his teammate Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb. He can take a lot of the short and intermediate routes and take it the distance as a home run hitter. I compared him a little bit to a Deshaun Jackson, and I honestly feel like he's just a better version of a Deshaun Jackson. He can take the top off of a defense, and I don't know. It's still a little bit perplexing to me. But as Maddie was saying, Bryan Edwards is an absolute baller. And people will remember that name. One of the comparisons, and it is a very high comparison for Bryan Edwards. I think I've said it a few times to Maddie. But the comparison that I always would put for Bryan Edwards is Anquan Bolden. A very physical wide receiver, a guy that, can literally get the tough yards, and a guy that is just a very physical freak at the point of attack and how he catches the ball and really fights for yardage. I just think that he is just so good. And I will say this now. Brian Edwards will lead the Oakland, now Las Vegas Raiders in targets and potentially receptions as well. He will be their leading receiver in 2020. Edwards will. That's obviously not to say, will Darren Waller get a lot of credits or a lot of targets? I don't know. Because Darren Waller obviously emerged very late, and that's one of those players that they have to lean on potentially for Derek Carr to help move the football down the field. Obviously, it helps take the pressure off having a pretty good running back and Josh Jacobs behind you. But again, they are going to need Derek Carr to take a little bit more chances than just 5-yard passes every single time, every single game. They need him to be the player that he once was in college. I mean, a guy that could spread the football around, a guy that could throw it deep, a guy that could be pretty darn accurate and efficient. I mean, they need him to be that guy. They need him to be the guy that they always see against the Denver Broncos. A guy that will get the ball out quick to eliminate a pass rush, be very, very efficient, move the football down the field, and be very, very effective. And that's really where that's going to come down to. They need a 16-game season of what Carr has always done to the Broncos. And then on the Broncos side of things, we've always touched on it. They offensively, if you look at this team last year to where they are on the offensive side of the ball, it's like you're looking at a completely different team. The wide receiving group is about as deep as I have ever seen. It's the deepest I've ever seen. Let's just say it that way. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick, Deshaun Hamilton, Tyree Cleveland. They are so deep. They decided to keep 7 wide receivers on their roster. You add in the tight end position. The tight end position may even end up being better than it once had been. And that's all because Jake Butt is healthy, really. And then you add Albert O to this mix, a teammate of Drew Lock, a guy that may not end up seeing a lot of yardage, but could end up seeing some tight end production because of his size and effectiveness as being a red zone threat. So now you're looking at it from the standpoint with everybody on the offensive line to the point where Graham Glasgow is added to the mix. Garrett Bowles is entering a contract year, and we all know the argument, of course, with the contract year. It boasts better play. So the Broncos on paper are better on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they did lose Von Miller. The question certainly still becomes how long Von Miller's out. But I will trust Vic Fangio until the dogs come home. And with Vic Fangio, he's a defensive-minded head coach. And if he can make a defense work with guys like Jeremiah Atachu, Malik Reed, Bradley Chubb, and Derek Tuska, really, for that matter, if they decide to call him up, then that I'm all for that. And frankly, if they decide that they want to call up Tuska and still sign a Cameron Wake or a Clay Matthews, and frankly, as we alluded to at the top of the show when they brought in those guys, they never brought in Terrell Suggs or even talked about Terrell Suggs. And maybe that was just more of the experience with Suggs and Fangio, but they haven't even gotten into these guys. So I just think that overall they are a much better team on paper, and they are a playoff team, and they will be a playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously injuries have a say, and it's going to affect us if we're going to be able to still get after the passers, still be able to move the football, all that stuff. Like Sutton and Hamler are both questionable for week 1. Who knows how long those injuries last. Hamler had an issue which prevented him from running at the combine and everything. So it's just a recurring thing, and we got to monitor that. But I mean, we definitely have a shot. We've got second-year Drew Lock stepping in, and obviously I loved what I saw out of him last year. And now you add Melvin Gordon to the mix, and I think we're going to have to be a little more efficient running the football. And maybe with Gordon in, a lot of our tells aren't going to be there. You know, that was the issue was when we had Lindsey in, it was pretty much a run, and when he wasn't in, it was pretty much a pass. And our offense, I think, is going to have a little bit better balance under Shermer. I think we're going to be able to spread it out and throw the ball around a little bit. And I think that's going to help our defense be able to just kind of play loose and go make plays. And our defense hasn't really had a lot of experience as of late playing with leads. So that's, it's synergistic football. It's offense scoring points, putting pressure on the other offense, defense having opportunities to get sacks and turnovers. And those guys really get the glory stats there on defense. And it's when you can give up a play on defense and you're not playing so tight and you have the freedom to go make plays, I think that some of the guys, like Tuska, for instance, coming in, you can make a few more mistakes when you've got an offense that can still score points and you don't have to basically be perfect defensively. And it seemed like if the Broncos got into a game where, they gave up 2 touchdowns early, it was really tough sledding for us to come back. We weren't really built to come back really since Peyton Manning's second to last season. We haven't had an offensively resilient team. So we now have that with Drew Lock and all the talent that we've got surrounding him. So that's great. Fangio, I like the schemes that he has. He's obviously, defense is his bread and butter. He does a lot with outside linebackers. So if I have to have anybody come in and help get somebody up to speed right away, as far as outside linebacking core goes, or edge goes to help cover up for the loss of Von Miller, we're in pretty dang good hands having Vic Fangio running the show. So I like the Broncos' chances. I really like the Broncos' chances now. We'll talk about our little preview coming up soon on our special pod. But, yeah, so recap, we've got only a difference in the Bengals and the Steelers. All the other representatives, the Chiefs and Broncos, the Ravens, the Colts and Titans, and the Buffalo Bills representing the AFC for Cam and me. Real quick, since we've done the NFC, we've done the AFC, what is your selection for the Super Bowl, and then who wins it?
I think on the Super Bowl side of things, this is going to sound like a cop-out, but people, I really do feel really like the idea to have the surprise pick, like a Buffalo and Tampa Bay or something like that, or really a surprise team from the AFC, kind of make it to the Super Bowl. This is going to sound like a cop-out, but I believe that the Baltimore Ravens or the Kansas City Chiefs will be one of those two teams that make it out of the AFC. And for the Chiefs' sake, they'll probably end up making it back to the Super Bowl. But I will say that the Baltimore Ravens make the Super Bowl this year, and they will play. And they will play the New Orleans Saints.
Interesting. That's definitely an interesting pick. I'm not picking against Tom Brady, so I'm going to say that even though they lose Week 1 to the Saints, I think they'll figure it out by the end of the year. I like Tom Brady against the. I don't like it, but the Kansas City Chiefs are probably getting back. I don't think that Jackson is going to be able to figure out the playoffs quite this year. He doesn't have a playoff win yet. That first one's really tough to get. They might get that one, but the Chiefs, they're just way, way too loaded. The defense can give up 28 to 30 points in a game, and it's like nothing to them because the offense will score 40. So I think it's going to be the Brady-Mahomes Super Bowl, and I think I would have actually maybe picked Denver, honestly, to represent the AFC if Von Miller was healthy. But yeah, so and then in that Super Bowl, like kind of anything can go. But I'd probably still have to go Mahomes. I don't like it, and I know that's not really a hot take, but Mahomes over Brady in the Super Bowl.
And also, this is not a prediction, but what I want is something that we can finally have. I want a Drew Lock versus Tom Brady Super Bowl. I want a Lock versus Brady Super Bowl. Like, as far as what I want a Lock versus Brady Super Bowl. I want one where you have potentially, and by all intents and purposes, if Lock goes to the Super Bowl, then he's in the MVP voting without question. Mm-hmm. So then you'd have a guy that really emerged in his second season, and a guy that is arguably the best as far as quarterbacks go, the best quarterback of all time. It's in some ways kind of like the whole Patrick Mahomes going up against Tom Brady thing again. So it would certainly be a really fun and a really fun storyline with everything going from the Broncos and the Patriots past with Brady and Gronkowski to anything from, Locke and Brady, and then just a whole bunch of other things. I think would be a pretty fascinating thing. And then, of course, you got John Pagano and Bruce Arians. So you have a Pagano and Arians relationship potentially with that one. So it'd be a fun little storyline, I think, with that Super Bowl. So that's ultimately what I want. Because, of course, Maddie, I'm a Bronco fan. I'm a Broncos fan. I want them to be representing the Super Bowl every single year.
Well, I mean, obviously, what I said is I think is going to happen is not what I want to happen.
Right.
I want
exactly,
the Chiefs to go. I want the Chiefs and Raiders and Chargers somehow to go 0-16 every season. Obviously, that's like impossible. Maybe they go. I don't know. Maybe they go 0-10 and 6 or something. 6 ties between them, but I think the Chiefs get there. And honestly, like, we have to at least win one game over the Chiefs before realistically we can talk about us really being the representative. They've won 9 straight. So yeah.
They're the new Broncos. I mean, really, of winning the division. I mean, if the Broncos were very consistent as far as winning the division and going to the playoffs every single year, and then Manning retired and the door swung wide open for the Kansas City Chiefs, to now the Kansas City Chiefs have a huge stranglehold right now as far as winning that division and potentially even winning many Super Bowls in the time from this time till whenever happens. I mean, they're a really darn good football team. And so for the Broncos, like Maddie said, for them to really cross that, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it more on the preview show. But for them to really cross that bridge and really touch the Kansas City Chiefs as far as how close they are, they have to at least win a game this year as far as a barometric and finding out, okay, how close is the Broncos team with the Chiefs. It's going to be really interesting to see where that team is at going forward. But overall, Maddie, as we're wrapping up this AFC preview and now our entire preview, all in all, any final thoughts?
It's just good to have football back. Thursday night was pretty entertaining, even though the Chiefs seemed like they had, dominated time of possession 3-1. It's just really fun to watch football and to kind of have some sense of normalcy, even though we're watching games without fans and stands and all the masks and the face shields and all that stuff. Like, football's football. I don't care if they're 7 years old hitting each other or 27 years old hitting each other. Like, I love watching football, and I definitely am not taking the season for granted, especially considering that many thought it would not happen. So props to all the people working hard and putting things and procedures in place to allow for safety for the players and to just kind of allow us to have this. A lot of us need it. And so I'm just very grateful that we have Broncos football to talk about it all this year. And I really am hoping that the injury bug stays away and that Vaughn can have a nice, quick recovery and Drew Lock can take a step forward and the Broncos could actually have hope, which is something that we haven't had in an awful long time. So really, really excited to have that and have football back as an integral part of my life for at least the next several months, hopefully.
Football is back. It returned on Thursday as the Kansas City Chiefs played the Houston Texans. This has been the AFC Preview Show, and coming up on our very next episode, we will do a special edition where we do a Broncos Preview Show coming up on the Manely Broncos Podcast. And please tune into the Manely Bronco Podcast. You guys can listen to it on Spreaker, on Spotify, on Google Podcast, on iTunes, anywhere that you guys feel free to listen to the podcast. You guys can certainly tune in anytime you want. And thank you guys so much for making the Manely Broncos Podcast your daily, as far as your daily or just your daily routine. And if you guys, whenever you want to listen to it, thank you guys so much for doing it. And again, as we said during the show, if you guys are listening on iTunes, please subscribe to the Manely Bronco Podcast and let us know certainly what you think about it. If you guys feel like we need to do things better or make the podcast better, let us know. And both Maddie and I will definitely look into it, and we will become a better podcast because of it. So thank you guys so much. Follow the Manely Bronco Podcast at Manely Broncos. Follow Matty Moles at Matty Moles Pod. Follow myself at Cameron Parker PO. This has been another edition of the Manely Broncos Podcast.
Saddle up.